Transmissions are one of the most complex parts within a vehicle. Next to an engine and electrical system, you want them working right. But unfortunately, in the last 5 years, with the advent of dual clutch gearboxes, 10-speed automatics, it's no shock why in fact there are problems. I'm going to share a list of some of the worst recalls of transmissions on the market today, so you can go armed with the information you need when you're buying your next new car. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
The first transmission recall goes to a 2022 to 2024 Toyota Sequoia, as well as the Lexus LX600, their full-size SUV, and of course the Toyota Tundra. Unfortunately, the Tundra has had its share of problems in the last few years with that 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6. That's been a big problem with bearing issues and of course some major catastrophic engine failures, and we know that recalls currently outstanding are exceeding 100,000 units. But there's also another list of recalls for the automatic transmission that goes in these vehicles here to the tune of about 280,000 vehicles are impacted by a recall because of that transmission, where they say in fact the vehicle could inadvertently roll away unexpectedly or start to move even when not necessarily in gear. Now, it was fortunately a software patch, and fortunately it's not a big cost and not a big issue for the consumer, but ultimately it's something to be aware of. Between engines, transmissions, the Toyota Tundra and many vehicles like it certainly have their hands full. Now, Ram has a couple of big recalls. The first one here goes to 2019 to 2020 Ram 25 and 3500 HD type trucks, and there's a problem with the automatic transmission, and allegedly there's a potential for spillover as a result of pressure buildup in the transmission, which of course leads to fluid on the exhaust system and ultimately a very flammable and explosive condition. Now, fortunately, only about 84,000 vehicles were recalled for this particular issue, but when it was sorted and Stellantis took over, they came up with a solution, and the solution was basically replace the transmission valve body separator plate and reprogram the TCU to get the vehicle on board. That would potentially drop the pressures down and eliminate the risk of hot transmission fluid on the exhaust, which again could potentially lead to a fire or catastrophic failure. Now, clearly some of these issues result from quality control technology, and ultimately some of these issues just somehow squeak through the production line. But these vehicles here clearly had a bit of an issue for some time in the HD trucks by Ram, and if you had one from 2019 to 2020 and haven't already had that issue resolved, make sure you check NHTSA to ensure that your heavy-duty truck has been looked after. The next one is a 2020 to 2023 Mercedes-Benz, two different models, the GLE 450 and the GLS 450. And it's a transmission issue where allegedly the vehicle won't entirely shift down. It basically shifts down, down, down until the last gear, and many times it just locks up in that last gear, it won't downshift, go to neutral, and these vehicles will stall. Now, stalling issue with 100,000 vehicles is pretty significant. Mercedes-Benz has had a problem here for the last few years with this issue, but fortunately it's just a reprogramming problem, and reprogramming is not going to come at a big expense, and get that taken care of, and it's no longer a big issue. 100,000 of these units is not like 100,000 Kias. Clearly it's a significant problem. Just get on down to your Mercedes dealer and get that reprogrammed. Now, another classic example of too much technology we never had 5 or 10 years ago, but unfortunately it has to do with the start-stop system and an accumulator that would potentially leak fluid, and the potential for burning was definitely significant on a lot of GM, Cadillac, and Chevy products like the Buick Encore, the GMC Terrain, the GMC Acadia, the Buick Enclave, and other classics like the Cruze and the Malibu, as well as Cadillac's XT4, XT6, and several other, according to Jalopnik, between 2018 and 2020, meant that a lot of these vehicles were at a huge risk of potential for fire, and a lot of them had to be looked at by the dealer. And this recall included 194,000 and change units on the start-stop system, which was a clear indication that too much technology that we never once had, we're just adding more and more tech, creating more and more potential problems. Now, there was a bolt that potentially came undone, that just got serviced, had to be inspected. It's generally not a costly repair, but it was something that made the radar for problematic transmission transmission recalls. If you're liking the video so far, you're gonna love the rest of the channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and don't forget the notifications bell so you know when the next amazing videos come. The next recall wasn't necessarily one of these, but a bad transmission located in vehicles like the Subaru Ascent, Legacy, and the Outback, to the tune of almost 200,000 vehicles were recalled because of a drive chain issue that could potentially shatter and come loose or break, causing a risk of collision. The clutch would possibly not be fully engaged before the chain would pick up, and then allegedly you could have a chain just become fatigued and break altogether. Now, while this was largely an American issue that they addressed it, NHTSA got their hands on this and forced Subaru to fix a lot of these issues. Now, a lot of it was just programming to slow down the engagement on the TCU, but ultimately this was an issue for Subaru and one of the largest recalls known in Japanese history. Of course, with over 200,000 units recalled, meant it was a significant problem for right across the board for the brand. Another massive recall and a very problematic set of issues goes to a 2020 to 2023 Nissan Titan, as well as the Frontier, which coincidentally is one of their better trucks, and with that naturally aspirated V6, it is actually still a relatively safe choice overall. It's a good truck, and I would still recommend this as smaller trucks because it's one of the last few to actually have an NA V6, whereas everybody's going turbo 4s these days. But nonetheless, there was an issue with these vehicles, the Frontiers, the Titans, and the Nissan Z-Car. There was an issue with over 203,000 units between 2020 and 2023, where in fact you go to put the vehicle in park and it's actually not in park, because in a lot of these automatic transmission cars, you use what they call a parking pole, and it's sort of a gear lock to make sure that the vehicle doesn't roll once it's engaged in park. But allegedly that wasn't installed correctly or wasn't in order at all, and that would lead to vehicles inadvertently rolling away, causing potential for accidents. Now, the manual transmissions were always the safest way to go and probably the most fun to drive in some of these vehicles, but many people just want automatic, and it was the automatic transmissions in that time frame that were very much the problem. Nissan definitely got that sorted out in recent years, but in 2022 they felt that they needed to actually stop production temporarily to fix that rollaway issue. Another recall, not so much in the transmission way, but unfortunately it was a big impact. 2017 to 2022 Ford F350s, F250s, basically the HD trucks. There was allegedly a problem with the underside, of course, insulation, sound deadening, that would allegedly fall underneath the drive shaft and could potentially wrap itself around the drive shaft, rip the drive shaft apart, and basically send the vehicle into an uncontrolled skid or some other problem where they damage that aluminum drive shaft. They don't have the strength that the old steel drive shafts have, and unfortunately it was a potential risk. There was almost 250,000 of these vehicles recalled between those few years, and unfortunately if you were one of the owners, you had to take the vehicle in, take some time off. And the fortunate part, the plus part, is it wasn't the actual transmission itself, although it was tied directly to the transmission and could wreck it in some other way had that drive shaft actually became slightly tied up in the insulation. And the next recall, you had to know it. They thought they had a solution, but clearly there was more vehicles added to the list, because 2020 to 2023 Ram 2500 and 3500 trucks again had fluid leak issues, transmission fluids on the heavy duty trucks. Now what we have here is a half-ton light duty truck, but it's the HD trucks that had this problem, allegedly with the transmission overpressuring due to thermal, and of course you'd have fluid leaks onto the exhaust system, potentially leading to a catastrophic failure, or at the best case scenario, a fire. They had to add this recall to a whole pile list of 250,000 more HD Ram trucks between 20 and 23 model years, which resulted in addressing a ventilation issue and possibly replacing a dipstick. Clearly a problem ongoing. So if you're a driver of an HD truck by Ram, be sure to check on the recall and NHTSA to ensure that your vehicle again is not on that list, because there was 250,000 vehicles impacted in this second extension of that fluid leak recall by Ram. Now the next huge transmission recall goes unfortunately to 2020 to 2022 Chevy, Cadillac, and GMC products, mostly the full-size trucks like you're looking at the Yukon or the full-size pickup trucks that carry the diesel engine. Now according to NHTSA, there was about 461,000 units impacted by this potential failure, where in fact those vehicles with that diesel engine, the automatic transmission, could in fact lock up the rear wheels driving down the road, and that vehicle locks up and goes into a dangerous skid. That was a problem that impacted many vehicles across the board. Now allegedly NHTSA reports that it's a automatic transmission control valve contributing to the factor. Unfortunately, General Motors has a fix by reprogramming that control unit to reduce or eliminate the potential for those rear wheels locking up because of that control valve issue. Now, a lot of these diesels, we know they've been around a long time. The Duramax and the Allison transmission have been a great combination for overall hauling duty, but recalls are recalls, and almost 500,000 units impacted is a pretty significant number, impacting a pretty significant number of people. Now, one of the biggest recalls with really bad transmission issues related to the Ford Escape, C-Max, the Fusion, and the Transit Connect like this, as well as the Ford Edge, went on from 2013 to about 2019 and impacted 2.9 million units across the board. And what it was the shifter bushing from the cable to the transmission would become worn out. It could potentially break, and if it did, you could not shift your gears. A clear indication that there's a major problem. Ford had a solution, and the solution was essentially replace the bushing, inspect it, as well as put a protective cap on there, so it no longer became the problem that a lot of people had initially. Now, of course, that doesn't just impact commercial vehicles, but of course, vehicles, very popular ones like the Escape and the Fusion, meant that could literally impact just about anybody driving a modern day Ford. And with all of that said, be sure to check out that list of some of the worst engines you can possibly imagine. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.